Thank you for joining us. Welcome. We're going to give a few seconds for everyone to be able to join us for today's webinar. Thank you for joining. Welcome. My name is Ruth Chavez. I am a small business specialist for the National Disability Institute. This webinar will begin momentarily. As everyone joins, I'll go over the disclaimer so we're all set before we get started. The contents of this webinar were developed under Grant H421F24018 from the U.S. Department of Education. The department does not mandate or prescribe practices, models, or other activities described or discussed in this document. The contents of this webinar may contain examples of, adaptations of, and links to resources created and maintained by another public or private organization. The department does not control or guarantee the accuracy, relevance, timeliness, or completeness of this outside information. The content of this webinar does not necessarily represent the policy of the department. This publication is not intended to represent the views or policy of or be an endorsement of any views expressed or materials provided by any federal agency. You can find, thank you. And let's get started. So with that in mind, Debora, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to see so many people here today. My name is Debora Wagner. I'm on the faculty at Cornell University. I'm in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations and the Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability. And I'm going to be talking today about supplemental security income, which I'll be calling SSI. We're going to talk about some of the basics for SSI and what happens to SSI when people go to work, including when they start their own businesses or engage in self-employment. So this is a little bit of information about the Work Incentive Support Center, which is where I work at Cornell University. And this is the amazing team that I work with. All of the sessions that I present include everybody on this team participating, except maybe Parker, the dog. Parker is not very helpful, but he's on the slide because sometimes we hear him in the background barking, but we should not hear him today. So today we're really going to focus on the basics for SSI. We're going to take a look at an SSI calculation worksheet, but good news, I'm not going to make you do any math. There is no test, but I will show you how that math can be done if you'd like to use a calculation sheet. We're going to talk about how SSI treats earned income and unearned income. And we're going to talk about the SSI resource rules. And then we're going to put it all together and actually look at a case study for how somebody on SSI used all of these program rules to work. I'm going to be pausing as I go through this session, kind of section by section, and asking if there are any questions. My good friends at NDI are going to be monitoring the Q&A box. You can post your questions there, and I'm happy to answer those. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions, I'd be happy to answer those questions after the session, and those answers will be posted with the course materials on the website. So let's get started with the basics about SSI. So some of you may have been here in March and seen my colleague Aleda talk about SSDI and work. And Title II benefits, or SSDI, these are benefits for people who've worked and paid FICA taxes. Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, is a very different program. It's a needs-based program. It's not an insurance program, and you can find the rules in Title 16 of the Social Security Act. And it's the newer of the two disability programs that Social Security administers. This program was implemented in 1974. And the first thing you have to do to be eligible for SSI is to meet one of three categorical tests. So you have to be either age 65 or older. You have to be blind, which has a very specific definition at Social Security. It means your visual acuity in your better eye is less than or equal to 20/200 with correction, or your field of vision is less than 20 degrees. Or you have to meet the Social Security definition of disability. So you have to be aged, blind, or disabled in order to be eligible for SSI. But in addition to those categories, you also must be financially eligible for SSI. That means your countable income has to be less than the SSI base rate, and your countable resources must be less than the SSI resource limits. And we're going to take a look at all of this in more detail in just a few minutes. So the idea behind SSI is really to bring everybody up to a minimum threshold amount. And this threshold amount is called the federal benefit rate. It is the maximum amount that Social Security will pay individuals or couples who receive SSI on a monthly basis. Now, this amount is adjusted each January, so around October of each year, Social Security publishes what they call their cost of living adjustment, and you can see what the new federal benefit rate will be in the coming year. So this year, for 2026, the federal benefit rate for SSI for an individual is $994. That's the most that Social Security will pay an individual. If you have an SSI couple, meaning that you're both eligible for SSI and Social Security considers you to be married, then you're paid an amount for couples. This year, that amount is $1,491. So you'll notice that the couple rate is not twice the individual rate. It's actually 1.5 times the individual rate. Social Security thinks that there's an economy of scales to being married, that two people can share a one-bedroom apartment, can share the costs of food and utilities, and so they need less money when they're together, okay? So in most states, people on SSI automatically get Medicaid coverage. Now, there are 8 states where people on SSI have to go and do a separate application for Medicaid. We've listed the states here. So if you are in Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota, or Virginia, when you get SSI, you have to do a separate application for Medicaid, okay? And for a lot of people, when they're thinking about going to work, they're not only worried about what's going to happen to their SSI payment, the money they get each month, but they're very worried about what's going to happen to their Medicaid, because we all need to be healthy and well to work, and that includes people who use Medicaid. So I'm going to start by showing you an essential tool, and it can be kind of overwhelming, but don't worry. We're going to talk about some of this in more detail. And this is a tool that work incentive planners use to help people understand what their SSI payment amount will be when they start working. And we call this the SSI calculation worksheet. I'm going to magnify it in a minute and show you some of the details. But there's also an interactive web version of this document that you can find online at yti online.org/SSI-calculation-worksheet. So I'm going to magnify this to make it a little bit easier to see. I know it's really small. So there are 5 steps to this worksheet, and the first step looks at unearned income. So if somebody on SSI has unearned income, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a little bit, we would put that amount in here at step 1. Maybe they're getting some Social Security disability insurance. Maybe they get childhood disability benefits. Maybe they're getting a regular gift from somebody of money, some other type of income they didn't work for. And Social Security won't count all of that. They apply a general income exclusion, and it is a whopping $20. I know that is not very much money, but that is the amount that you will get deducted. And after that, they come up with the countable unearned income. Now, it's step 2, we've got the gross earned income, or if you're self-employed, your net earnings from self-employment. So if you work for somebody else and you're paid a wage, you are going to use your gross earned income, your gross wage amount. If you are self-employed, Social Security lets you deduct business expenses, the same expenses that the IRS lets you deduct. So you deduct business expenses, and then you multiply that amount by a factor that gives you credit for the FICA taxes that self-employed people have to pay for themselves. So once we come up with that net earnings from self-employment amount, we start there, and then you'll see there are lots of deductions. For people who are on SSI and go to work, Social Security deducts a lot of their income. There are special deductions for people who are students under age 22 regularly attending school. There's deductions for impairment-related work expenses, which are goods or services that you have to pay for out of pocket in order to be able to work. They have to be related to your disability. And so I think of things like prescription medication co-payments, special transportation, things that you need because of your disability in order to be able to work. You also get to deduct blind work expenses if you meet that Social Security definition of being blind. And through this all, they also were going to divide by 2. So Social Security counts less than half of somebody's earned income. Because of that, people on SSI who go to work are always better off financially. They are always going to have more money. So it's really important to keep that in mind. You will have more money when you work on SSI, guaranteed. So we apply all these deductions and we come up with countable earned income. In step 3, we're going to combine that countable earned income and unearned income and come up with a deduction if somebody has a plan to achieve self-support. Maybe you're saving money to help you reach your work goal. You can deduct that money that you're saving in an approved pass, and that's going to take you to your countable income. And then at step 4, they take your SSI base rate. We talked about it being $994 for an individual or $1,491 for a couple, and we subtract out countable income. So as income goes up, the SSI payment goes down, but it goes down gradually. So for people who are working, it's going to be a slow deduction. They're going to count less than half of the money you earn. In step 5, then we add together what that adjusted SSI payment is, together with the unearned and earned income that you're getting. We subtract out any of those work expenses you have, and we come up with how much money you have each month. And that way you know how much you have to budget and plan to spend each month. And that's really important. We want you to have accurate information when you're going to work. So let's talk about some of these income exclusions. So I mentioned that SSI will not count the first $20 of unearned income. And if you don't have any unearned income, you get to deduct that $20 from your earned income at step 2. And then SSI will not count the first $65 of your earned income and half the remainder. So less than half of your earned income will count for SSI. And then there are a number of work incentives that you can use to further reduce your countable income and increase the amount of that SSI payment. One of the things I want to really recommend is that if you're thinking about going to work and you're on SSI, that you work with a work incentive planner, somebody who is specially trained and can actually help you understand how these rules work for you. Because I can give you lots of information, but you want to know what it's going to mean for you. So work incentive planners look at your plan for work and all of your benefits, including SSI and Medicaid, and they help you understand exactly what will happen to each of your benefits when you go to work. That way you get to make informed choices about how much you want to work and how much you want to earn. I'm going to pause for a minute and I'm going to ask my friends at NDI if there are any questions in the Q&A box that we need to address at this point.
Question we have, but we have answered it, is they were asking for links for the SSDI webinar. So, and we just put that in there for them. So it's the only thing I have.
Great. So you can find those links in the chat box. So you guys will have the links to the SSDI session.
Okay, I apologize, Deborah. I could not get my my technology to work for a minute there. So somebody is asking, what if I don't want SSI? What kind of benefits do I get? I'm not sure if there are others, but I guess it's whether you qualify for SSDI instead, but.
Right. So if you've worked and paid into the Social Security system, paid FICA taxes, you might have insured status to get SSDI. You also could potentially get childhood disability benefits if your disability started before age 22 and you have a parent who's worked and paid in FICA taxes. You could actually get a benefit off their record if they themselves are getting a disability benefit from Social Security, if they're getting a retirement benefit from Social Security, or if they've died. So those are some other options for folks to take a look at.
Several people are asking where they can find benefit planners. So I'm sure we probably already have a WIPA link in there somewhere. But we can put some of that stuff in the chat for you. If you are working with vocational rehabilitation, I would absolutely tell you to check with your VR counselor, as they are able to cover the cost of that if you're on benefits and would be able to give you some local folks. Another one is, if an individual is getting SSI and SSDI, do they need to use the SSI calculation worksheet to find out how much their SSI payment will decrease, or do they just need to stay under SGA?
That is a great question, and the answer is they do need to use that SSI calculation sheet, because if they stay under SGA, that's going to impact their SSDI, but their SSI payment's still going to be reduced. So they would need to also do that calculation sheet. And I recommend if you get both, that's where having a work incentive planner to help you with some of this math can be really helpful, because they can do those calculations for you.
I can answer the next one. It says SSI take into account money in the ABLE accounts, and absolutely not. That is the beauty of ABLE. You can have beyond your $2,000 resource limit if it's in an ABLE account. So
yep, the first $100,000 in an ABLE account doesn't count as a resource for SSI. And there's another question about trusts. We're going to talk about resources in just a few minutes. So if you all can be patient, we will get there in just a few minutes.
All right, thanks, Deborah.
Thank you, Nikki. I really appreciate it. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about examples of what Social Security considers to be earned income. So some common examples include the wages that you're paid. So obviously you get a paycheck, your employer pays you, that's going to count as earned income. Royalties, so if somebody wrote a book or was in a TV commercial and they're getting royalty payments, those count as earned income. Bonuses based on work performance. So if you work at Walmart and they pay quarterly bonuses based on you meeting your work goals, that's going to count. We already talked about net earnings from self-employment and how Social Security calculates that income. They'll also count the value of items or services that you receive in kind in exchange for work. So let me give you an example. If I live in an apartment building and I help out my landlord by taking the garbage out to the curb every week, and once a week I vacuum the hallways and I dust the common areas, and I get a discount on my rent. So maybe everybody else is paying $1,200 in rent for their apartment, and I'm only paying $700. They're going to count that $500 discount as income to me because I've worked in exchange for that discount. Payments from sheltered workshops or activity centers count as earned income for SSI. Basically, anything you receive of value in exchange for work or labor that you do. Now let's talk about some of these SSI work incentives because these are kind of amazing. If you are a student under the age of 22 and you regularly attend school, they let you exclude money under the student earned income exclusion. And this means you can exclude up to $2,410 of earnings per month, up to an annual cap of $9,730. Now, those amounts are adjusted each year with that cost of living adjustment. So those probably are going to go up for 2027. So make sure you check and see what those amounts are each year. This is in recognition that students oftentimes will be working part-time while they're in school, or they might be doing some sort of summer work experience or some sort of paid work experience as part of their school program. And this allows them to deduct a lot of that income while they're still attending school. Now, another deduction is those impairment-related work expenses. And these are goods or services that you have to pay for out of your own pocket. You're not going to be reimbursed by anybody. And you need these goods and services to be able to work. And you need them because of your disability. So things like special transportation, medical care, durable medical equipment, assistive technology, these types of things can be deducted from your income when they're calculating the amount of your SSI payment. In addition, if you meet that Social Security definition for blind, you can deduct blind work expenses. And that's not only the expenses related to the fact that you're blind, it is all costs reasonably associated with earning income. So the taxes that you have to pay on your income, childcare, uniforms for work, meals that you consume during work, transportation to and from work, any expense related to working can be deducted for individuals who are blind and on SSI. And then you can also set aside income that you're saving in an approved plan to achieve self-support or PASS. And this is a special savings tool that allows people to save income or resources other than their SSI payment, and it gives them some SSI to make up for the money that they're setting aside or saving. And it lets you save towards your own work goal. Maybe your goal is to start a business and you've got some upfront costs. You could use a PASS for that. Maybe you need some special education or training or to get some sort of license or certificate. If there are costs associated with these things that you need to reach your work goal, you can fill out an application, and if approved by Social Security, you can save money in a PASS to help you reach those goals. So I'm going to pause for a minute and see if we have questions specifically about the work incentives. Other questions we'll wait on, but I'm going to see if I have any work incentive questions before I leave this. All right.
I'm just having a look through.
So the one thing I'm going to address is somebody's asking about special conditions and subsidies such as job coaching. You don't get to deduct those for SSI. So I'm not going to talk about those today. But if you go to the website and you watch the session that Aleda did last month on SSDI, I'm sure she talked about special conditions and subsidies. All right.
Right. Yeah, I don't see any other specifically to that. So
Me neither, Nikki. I'm glad we're on the same page. Let's keep going then.
okay.
So as I mentioned, a lot of people are not only worried about what's going to happen to their SSI payment, they're very worried about what's going to happen to their medical coverage. So let's talk about how you can keep Medicaid while working. So if you earn so much that your SSI payment is reduced to zero, meaning you're not getting any SSI, you can keep Medicaid using a program called 1619B. Now, in order to be eligible, your earned income has to be below a state threshold amount, or you can ask for an individual threshold if you have really high medical costs. If you would like to find those state threshold amounts, I've got a link in the slides. We're on slide number 16, and there is a link so that you can find those threshold amounts for each state, and that's on the Social Security website. And there's no time limit for how long someone can use 1619B Medicaid. So as long as you're getting an SSI payment, you've got Medicaid in most states. And even if you work and earn so much that your SSI payment will go to zero, you can keep Medicaid if you qualify for 1619B. So this is a really important program that people can use. And I think the bottom line is you're going to keep your Medicaid. And I think that's a really important piece that a lot of people are worried about. Many states also have programs called Medicaid buy-in. So even if you earn more than your state's 1619B threshold, you could use Medicaid buy-in to keep coverage. So you've got lots of options. So let's talk now about what SSI considers to be unearned income, and we'll talk about some exclusions from unearned income. So some common examples of unearned income that people might receive include public payments like SSDI, benefits paid by the Department of Veterans Affairs, railroad retirement benefits, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation. There's lots of examples. There's also in-kind support and maintenance, which means someone else is helping you with shelter costs. So maybe you're living with a friend or a family member and they're letting you stay for free and you're not paying to stay there. That could be in-kind support and maintenance. Or maybe you're living on your own, but somebody's helping you to pay your rent or your mortgage or your property taxes or utilities. That could be in-kind support and maintenance. Other examples of unearned income include private annuities and pensions, gifts and inheritances, spousal support or alimony, prizes and awards, dividends and interests. Basically, any money that you get without working for that money is going to be considered unearned income. But Social Security doesn't count all unearned income. There are some common exclusions I want to go through with you. So first, if you get infrequent or irregular income of not more than $60 per quarter, that doesn't count. So that covers things like birthday gifts and other holiday gifts that you don't receive on a regular basis. If you receive a gift or an inheritance and you plan to use it to pay for school expenses within 9 months, they will not count that as income. So if I inherit $10,000 today and I say to Social Security, I'm starting college in the fall, I'm going to pay my tuition in August, I'm going to use this $10,000 for that, then they won't count it as income for me. They also don't count federal, state, or local income tax refunds, including tax credits like the Earned Income Tax Credit. Now, there are 3 situations where they're going to count the income of somebody else as if it were your income. It's called deemed income. And this is because sometimes there are other people who may be financially responsible for us. So if I'm married and I'm on SSI, but my spouse is not on SSI, then they're going to count some of my spouse's income as if it were my income. They're going to deem income to me. If you're a minor child and you are on SSI and your parents are not on SSI, they're going to deem some of the income from the parents to the child. And if I'm an immigrant and I have a sponsor and I'm on SSI, they're going to count some of my sponsor's income as being my income through a process called deeming. Now, I mentioned in-kind support and maintenance, but I just want to remind you that this is unearned income in the form of a shelter-related living expense that someone else is paying for. And this unearned income can reduce the amount of my SSI payment. The idea is that SSI is supposed to pay for basic living expenses. So if someone else is paying my shelter costs, which is a basic living expense, then I need less money in SSI. That's the theory, at least. I'm going to pause now and see if we have questions about unearned income before I move on and I talk about resources and how SSI treats resources.
I'm having trouble with my camera, so I'm going to stay off right now, but I don't see any specific things. Well, a little bit. There's somebody asking about the impact of if they receive gifts and gift cards.
Yep, anything of value. So if my grandmother wants to be kind to me and she gives me $100 grocery gift card every month to help me out, that's going to count as unearned income and it's going to reduce my SSI payment.
And I'm not quite sure if I understand completely this question. Somebody's asking about a stipend affecting a spouse's SSI. He's blind, and can the person earn less than $200 a month without risking his full SSI? But then they're talking about stipends, so I'm not sure I'm following that. Perhaps whoever that is might want to reword that because I'm not sure I really understand it. I don't know if you do, Deborah.
Now, I'm going to read some of these though. Somebody's asking if instead of using a pass, you could use an ABLE account, and you could, but that income would still reduce your SSI payment if you put it in the ABLE account. If you have the money put in a pass, then it can reduce your countable income and it can save you money. I've got somebody who asked if job coaching is an impairment-related work expense. And a job coaching is an impairment-related work expense if you're paying for it out of your own pocket. So if the employee is paying for the job coach, they can use that as an impairment-related work expense. But if their employer is paying for it, maybe state vocational rehabilitation is paying for it, then it doesn't count as an impairment-related work expense.
Someone's asking if they're getting help paying their property taxes. Would that be considered unearned income?
That would be in-kind support and maintenance. Yes, that would be unearned income. Yep.
Okay. All right. How about an apprenticeship program?
If you're earning income from an apprenticeship program, that's still going to impact the amount of your SSI. That is considered earned income.
And someone else asked about a work bonus.
About a work bonus? Yeah, if it's based on performance, it's going to be earned income. If it is not based on performance, it is going to be unearned income.
Okay. They're coming in really fast. I'm trying to scroll and see.
So somebody asked again about job coaching. If somebody other than the worker is paying for that job coach, it is not going to reduce the countable income for SSI. You can't use it. Somebody asked about housing subsidies. This is a good one. So let's say I have a Section 8 voucher and I'm using that to pay for my housing. That is specifically excluded and will not count as in-kind support and maintenance. So if I'm using the local housing authority's subsidy program, that does not count. But if my parents are subsidizing my rent, that does count as income.
Someone else's good question is asking about those states that have additional state disability payments and if they count.
It depends on the source of that payment. So in the SSI rules, there's a whole long list of types of payments that don't count. They call them exclusions. And so depending on the source of those payments, they may well be excluded. So for example, if you're a disabled veteran and you're getting a pension from the state because you're a disabled veteran, that's specifically excluded in the rules. So you'd have to go and look at the rules to see if your payment falls under one of those exclusions. Somebody else asks about the profit from real estate sale or additional rental income. If you're a landlord, that's absolutely going to be income. If you're a landlord, they're going to look to see whether you regularly are engaged in the business of renting property to decide whether it's earned or unearned income. So there's a difference between renting out the spare room in my house and owning an apartment building that I'm renting to people.
There's another one about 1619B. It looks like if the person's not on SSI, so then that's not going to apply, right, Deborah?
If I don't want SSI, yeah, you can't use 1619B unless you are on SSI and you go to work and you earn so much in earned income that that SSI payment is reduced to zero. Somebody says, what's the major difference between earned and unearned income? Work. If you perform some sort of work to get that money, it is earned income. If you didn't do anything, didn't work, then it's not going to count as earned income. So if my grandma just gives me $100 per month and a grocery gift card just to help me make ends meet, that is unearned income.
Okay, there are so many questions, but maybe you keep going and some of them might get answered and we'll revisit, I think.
Okay.
I will say that these webinars, both SSI and SSDI, always generate a lot of questions. And I just want to assure everybody that if your question does not get answered in the time frame that we have, what we will do is we will still collect all of those questions. We'll put them into an FAQ document. We will get Deborah and her colleagues to answer them, and then we will send them out to everybody who is registered. So just don't panic if you put a question and it hasn't got answered. Just wanted to clarify. Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate you. All right. So I told you to get SSI, you had to fall into one of those three categories: aged, blind, or disabled. And we talked about the income rules. You have to have countable income that's less than your base rate. But there's also resource rules. So let's talk now about resources and how they impact eligibility for SSI. So I'm going to start with the definition of a resource that they use at Social Security. And this is a quote: cash or other liquid assets or real or personal property that a beneficiary owns and could convert to cash, which can be used to provide for food or shelter. And I've given you a cite here to the Code of Federal Regulations. It's Title 20, Code of Federal Regulations. And then the section is 416.1201A. And a resource is counted or excluded as of the first moment of the month. So every month at the very beginning of the month, 12:01 a.m. on June 1st or August 1st or December 1st, any month, they're going to look and see what resources you have. Just a snapshot, the very first moment of the month. And they're going to add those resources together, and they're going to see if they're under the SSI resource limit. So these resource limits are set by statute. The last time they were increased was in 1989, and they are not subject to regular cost of living increases. So currently, if you're an individual on SSI, your resource limit is $2,000. If you are an SSI couple, your resource limit is $3,000. If you go over that amount, you are not eligible for an SSI payment for that month. So let's take a look at what counts as resources for SSI. So anything that you own that could be changed to cash and used to pay for food or shelter is going to count. So that money that you have in your pocket right now, your cash on hand, that counts. Money in bank accounts, that's a resource. Stocks, bonds, half of the amount of jointly owned accounts, all of that is going to count. And I'd say be careful with jointly owned accounts. Make sure that your name is not on any other accounts because that could impact your SSI eligibility. If you own land, the value of the land will count, as will personal property. So if I collect antiques or fine art, that's going to count. And we even deem or count some of the resources from those people who are responsible for us. So again, if I'm on SSI and my spouse isn't, they're going to deem some of my spouse's resources to me. If you have a minor child on SSI and the parent is not, they're going to deem some of the parent's resources to the child. And if we have an immigrant who's on SSI and their sponsor is not, they're going to deem some of that sponsor's resources as being available to the immigrant. Okay? Now, there are some things that don't count. So let me talk about some of these exclusions. So the home that you live in and the land that it's on does not count. So I live in the city. I got a little teeny tiny plot of land, but my house and the land that it's on do not count as resources. My friend lives on a horse farm and owns many acres of land and barns and outbuildings, and none of that counts because it's where her house is. And as long as her house is on that land, then none of that is going to count. They're not going to count your household goods or personal effects. So your clothes, your toiletries, your personal care items, none of that's going to count. They even let you have a burial space for yourself and immediate family members, and those aren't going to count. And if you'd rather have a burial fund that can be used to pay for your final expenses, they'll allow you to save up to $1,500 each for yourself on SSI and for your spouse. If you have a life insurance policy, make sure it's a term life insurance policy, which means it has no value until after you pass. If you have a whole life insurance policy, it has a cash value now and you could cash it out during your lifetime. One of the biggest challenges I see for people on SSI is they have those whole life insurance policies and the value creeps above $1,500 without you even realizing it. And suddenly you've got a countable resource that could put you over the resource limit. And as Nikki mentioned, money saved in an ABLE account does not count for SSI up to $100,000. And so I've been working as a work incentive planner for many, many years, 30 years now. And I'll tell you, when I first started, I would tell people, go to work. You'll be better off. You'll always have more money when you work and you're on SSI, but don't save more than $2,000. Well, that's not very fair, is it? So ABLE accounts really allow people to work and save now. So they've kind of been game changers. So I'm going to pause now and see if we have questions about resources for people on SSI before we take a look at a case study and put some of these pieces together.
Okay. Again, we're back to the sort of non-earned resourcey type of thing. So instead of a gift card, what if someone yearly gets $1,200 versus $100 12 times a month?
They're going to end up with an SSI overpayment. That's going to make them ineligible for an entire month's payment of SSI. Not a great idea because it's more than the $994 individual rate, and it's going to make them ineligible for the SSI payment. So they would
Yeah.
lose a month's SSI.
What about if someone's working and they get a 401k that an employer pays into?
So with a 401k, if it is not available to the individual, so most of the time, if you're still working for that company, it is not an available resource, you couldn't cash it out, then it's not going to count as a resource. But a lot of times, if you leave that job, then you could cash out that money. Now, if you're younger than whatever they define as full retirement age, you might pay tax penalties on that if you take it out early. Social Security doesn't care. It's a resource. If it's something you could access and cash out, even if you'd have to pay tax penalties, then it's a resource. So you have to be very careful. A lot of people like to use 401ks and other employer-sponsored retirement savings plans because you get a saver's tax credit. But please know that if you're not participating in an employer's retirement plan, and instead you're using your ABLE account to save money for your retirement, you can still get the saver's tax credit. So I encourage people to think about using the ABLE account for that purpose.
Not personal effects. So someone's asking, what about an iPad or a MacBook? Do they count as a resource, or would that just be under personal effects?
That would normally be under personal effects. Now, if you were like my friend Mark and you collected every Apple device ever made and you had an entire room of your house with thousands of them, that's going to count, right? But the items you're using every day personally, probably that's going to be personal effects. That won't count unless you're a collector or something like that.
How about if they get financial aid for going to school or
That's a great
tax
question.
return?
So the financial aid that you receive to go to school does not count if it's for educational purposes. And it doesn't matter whether it's a loan, a grant, a scholarship, or even if you're doing work study. So, maybe you're working in the library 10 hours a week to help pay your education expenses. That money, even though you worked and earned it, is excluded under the rules for Social Security.
How about if you have money in a minor child's account and the parent is on SSI? Does that child's account count as a resource?
So children are not financially responsible for their parents, so we don't deem income or resources from children to parents, only from parents to children. So the money in a child's account is not going to impact the parent on SSI.
Okay. Several other questions, but since we're talking about ABLE accounts, someone's asking if there's an age limit for the ABLE account.
So you're probably thinking of the fact that until this year, you had to have had a disability that started before age 26. Now, you could open an ABLE account at any age, but you had to prove that your disability started before age 26. But starting this year, January 1st of 2026, that age limit increased to 46. So as long as you have a disability that started before age 46, you can open an ABLE account now. And that means a lot more people are eligible to use ABLE accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did just put more information about ABLE accounts into the chat. Lexi did that for us. And if you go and check out the ABLE National Resource Center that we have under NDI, there are a lot of resources. There's archive webinars, all kinds of things. So that'll really help on that. And someone's saying, isn't an individual on SSI allowed one vehicle, no matter how much the value of it is?
That is correct. Yep, people on SSI, they will not count one vehicle. This list is not all inclusive. This was just some examples of SSI resource exclusions. There are a lot more.
Right. Okay, there's more things about ABLE accounts. Okay, let's just move on. And then we can, because there's several ABLE questions. I think we've already kind of said money up to 100,000 if it's in an ABLE account, wherever it comes from, doesn't count against your resource limit. So, okay, keep going, Deborah.
Thanks, Nikki. All right, let's do a case study and let's look at what happens to Morgan's SSI when Morgan gets a job. So in the beginning, when we first meet Morgan, Morgan gets $994 per month in SSI, but they're really struggling to pay for basic living expenses and they want to try working. So Morgan gets a job earning $1,285 per month in gross wages. So the question is, what will happen to Morgan's SSI? And what will happen to Morgan's Medicaid coverage? So let's take a look and see these answers. So first of all, even though Morgan is earning $1,285 per month, SSI will only count $600 of Morgan's wages. We did an SSI calculation sheet and we deducted the $20 general income exclusion and the $65 earned income exclusion, and we divided by 2. So only $600 will count. And because of that, Morgan is still eligible for an SSI payment of $394 per month. So we take their $994 SSI federal benefit rate, we subtract the $600 in countable income, and that's how we know that their adjusted SSI payment will be $394 per month. So Morgan will have a total of $1,679 each month to pay their bills. And we combined that adjusted SSI payment of $394 with their wages of $1,285. And that's how we came up with $1,679 each month. Morgan has more money when they work, right? Because before they only had $994 and now they have $1,679. And because Morgan still gets an SSI payment, they will keep Medicaid in their state. So they're in one of the states where if you get SSI, you get Medicaid. So Morgan is going to still keep Medicaid coverage. And this is a very common situation that I would see where people would come in, what's going to happen to my SSI? I need to keep my Medicaid. And by working with the work incentive planner, they knew exactly what to expect and they could make an informed decision about whether or not they wanted to work and earn this additional income. Okay? So let me do a summary slide and then we'll get to more of the questions. So SSI requires that the person is age 65 or older, blind or disabled. They also require that the person have limited income and resources. So this year, the federal benefit rate for SSI for an individual is $994. And if we have an SSI couple, their base rate is $1,491. Social Security is going to reduce that SSI payment amount based on countable unearned and countable earned income. People on SSI also need to make sure that their countable resources do not go above the SSI resource limit. And people on SSI are always better off financially when they go to work. Guarantee it. I'm a math whiz, I'm telling you, it's always the case. I've done hundreds of these calculations, thousands, and people are always better off when they go to work. So I am going to actually stop sharing my slides at this point. I'm going to thank you all for paying attention. You guys have asked great questions. You're engaged. I love that. And let's address some of these questions now.
Okay, someone's asking that if they get both SSI and SSDI, do they lose their SSI when they reach that break-even point if they're working, or as the same as if they were only getting SSI alone?
So remember that SSDI is going to count as unearned income, and that means their break-even point, the amount that they need to earn and before their payment reduces to zero for SSI, is going to be lower. So they're going to have that SSI payment reduced to zero with less income than somebody who has no unearned income.
Somebody here is asking an SSDI question, and I know that was last month. Just remember, you can go to where the same place you registered for this, and you will find the recording and all the documents and handouts and everything from last month's SSDI workshop there. But I don't know if this is a quick question for you. How much do you have to pay in to get SSDI? So like how many quarters have you had to work and all that sort of stuff?
It depends. So you have to look at each year that the person worked, and you have to look at how much they had to earn in order to qualify for a credit. You can earn 4 credits per year. And there's a look back period, and it varies depending on your age at onset of disability. And you need half of the available credits in that look back period. So if somebody's under age 24, they look back 3 years, and they need to have earned 6 credits in that 3-year period. If they're age 31 or older, they're going to look back 10 years, and they're going to need 20 credits in that look back period. If they're between 24 and 31, they have this whole system where they subtract your current age, they subtract it 21, that's your look back period. But if you go into your My Social Security account, you can always look and see if you have enough credits to have insured status.
Thank you. Okay, for 1619B, do you have to apply for it, or is it automatically applied when the SSI goes to 0?
So the answer is it depends on where you are. And so it should be automatic almost everywhere. We worked very hard as attorneys across the country to make it automatic, but there are still some states that don't communicate well with Social Security through their state data exchange computer system. And so you might still have to get a letter from Social Security and take it to your state Medicaid agency for that to happen.
I think this question was related to something you were actually talking about earlier, but the person is saying that they are disabled, they live in Alabama, do not have children, so they're asking about 1619B because Alabama is not does not have expanded Medicaid.
So if you want 1619B Medicaid, you have to get SSI, and then you have to go to work, and you have to earn enough that your SSI payment is reduced to 0. And then you have 1619B Medicaid.
Not really sure what this one's asking. It says something about if the sponsor is responsible if a person is not a US citizen and will have a green card, but I don't know about responsible for what. So maybe we could get a bit of clarification.
I'm not an immigration attorney, so I'm not going to get too in the weeds on that immigration status stuff.
Right. Here's a good one. So what about if you get a grant to purchase supplies or small equipment for your business? And I think there might be a determination here, perhaps, I don't know, Deborah, between if you get a grant for startup, perhaps from a vocational rehabilitation agency, versus if you win a grant through the Verizon program, for example.
So yes, it's absolutely, Nikki, it's going to depend on the source of that grant. It's also going to depend on whether that grant is made directly in the name of your business, in which case it's business income, or whether the grant comes in your name, in which case it could potentially be your income. But the source of that grant might make it excluded. And so you'd have to look at those exclusions in the rules.
I think this one might be getting mixed up with 1619B, but it says, what does refer to 1634 states mean? I think it probably is 1619.
No, I can answer that one. So
Okay.
we had a slide where we listed the 8 states where if you live in those states, you don't automatically get Medicaid. Those are called 209B states because it's section 209B of the law. Everybody else who automatically gets Medicaid when they get SSI, they're in what we call 1634 states because it's section 1634 of the law.
Someone's confused about, it sounds like the correlation between able and pass. What if the money in able can be used for an expense? Why is it considered unless in pass? Not sure.
So both able and pass exclude resources, and they can exclude for able unearned income. For PASS, they can exclude earned and unearned income. But with PASS, when they exclude that income, you could get more money in SSI. But PASS has a lot of rules, and you can only save to reach a work goal. ABLE doesn't have as many restrictions. It doesn't have to be approved by Social Security, and you can save for all kinds of reasons. It's not limited to reaching a work goal.
I think this again refers to what you answered before about if you get an annual grant, how would it look for SSI? Again, you said, you know, if it's over the amount, in this case, they're using a $3,000 example. So in that month, they would not get a check, correct? Is what you said earlier.
Or the month they receive it, yeah.
Right. Also, you know, depending again, if it's a grant, you just answered about depending on the source.
Yeah.
How about medical equipment costs? Are those excluded? Glucose monitors, service animals, daily use devices needed for and during work?
Absolutely. Those could be impairment related work expenses. They could be deducted from your income. So your countable income would be less and you would get more in SSI. Those are some great examples of impairment related work expenses.
Okay, if you are a personal care worker for someone else, and I would imagine then therefore this person also would be on SSI and receive money through a waiver program, is that counted as earned for you?
It depends on the waiver program. Oftentimes, if you're a parent and a caregiver, it doesn't count. If you're a caregiver for someone other than your own child, it could count. It really depends on how that waiver program is set up and the source of the money that you're being paid.
If a person uses contributions deposited directly into an ABLE account to pay for property taxes, that is not income for SSI. So again, I'm guessing if they're drawing money out of their ABLE account in order to pay taxes.
So you can use an ABLE account to pay for shelter costs without that counting as income support and maintenance. But you got to be careful because the key is, where does the contribution come from? So if I take my paycheck and I have it directly deposited into my ABLE account, that still counts as earned income, right? And it's going to reduce my SSI payment. However, if my mom says, here's $1,000, I put it directly in your ABLE account for you to pay your property taxes, now it's my money. And when I use it to pay my property taxes, it doesn't impact my SSI payment.
Okay, someone else is asking about SSI qualifying if you are not a US citizen. So you already said that is not something.
Yeah, there are very, very few non-citizens or non-legal permanent residents who qualify for SSI. I recommend they talk to an immigration attorney to figure out their status, and then you can look at the SSI rules.
Someone's asking if benefit planners can help somebody with a PASS plan.
Absolutely. I've helped people apply for PASS many times working as a work incentive planner.
I'm not absolutely certain about this. Again, how do I get money back from Department of Education if I got approved for total and permanent disability? My income taxes were garnished. I don't know if this is, you know, student loan forgiveness or what that's really talking about. Does that make sense to you, perhaps?
Yes. So you thought your student loan had been forgiven based on permanent and total disability, but they still garnish your taxes. I am not an education attorney, but you need to find somebody who specializes in student loans and ask them to help advocate for you. There may be a way to do it. I don't know because I don't practice in that area.
How about 1619B? Does it apply to parents whose child is on SSI and the child gets cut off of SSI because of parental income?
No, the parents would have had to be getting SSI themselves, and their work reduced their own SSI payment to zero for them to have 1619B status.
Okay. If someone deposits money into a PASS account for the person receiving SSI, SSDI, and it is to start a business, will that lower the SSI, SSDI monthly benefit? I don't know if they mean into an ABLE account, or I'm not sure.
Well,
It
money
says
that you
pass
save,
account.
money that you would save in a pass account doesn't count as income. Other people shouldn't be depositing money into your pass. They should be giving you the money to deposit into the pass. You'd still have to say to Social Security, I got $2,000 from this source to help start my business, but the money went into my pass. Here's proof of that deposit into my account.
Someone must have mentioned something about a burial plot for $1,500 because someone wants to know where they can get that.
Yeah, I know. I always joke and I call that $1,500 your tarp and shovel money because it really is not enough money to do anything legal to dispose of a human body.
Okay. You'd mentioned before the difference between term and whole life policies. So this person is asking if the whole life policy value can be held in the ABLE account, only the interest earned portion.
I mean, you could withdraw that amount that is cash available and put it into your ABLE account, but you can't put the whole life insurance policy into the ABLE account. You could withdraw the money and put it into the ABLE account.
What kind of 401k tool can a self-employed person use?
If I were a self-employed person on SSI and I wanted to save for my retirement, I would use my ABLE account to accomplish that.
Yeah, and someone else again is asking about business grants. You already addressed that with depending on the source of the grant.
Yeah.
How do you suggest someone participating in work study prove that the earned income is for educational expenses and not living expenses?
So if they talk to the financial office at their college or university, they can give them a financial aid package summary that will include the work study portion of that package, and that will show Social Security that that is in fact work study.
Okay. Someone else again is asking about grants. What if in the past you applied for SSI when you were in school and had financial aid and were denied because of it? Don't know if maybe they put it in a bank account or something, don't know, because they determined school to be a form of work.
Well, it depends on when you were denied. If you were denied within the past 60 days, you can appeal. If it was more than 60 days ago, you would need to submit a new application for SSI.
Okay. Okay, so if a person with IDD can't access education, can they use gifted dollars toward private pay for day supports or recreational opportunities?
So no, that exclusion that we talked about for education specifically is for education. However, if family members want to help somebody with an intellectual disability pay for those types of expenses, they could deposit the money into their ABLE account, and then the person could use their ABLE account to pay for those expenses.
Okay, someone else again is asking about ABLE accounts and whether or not that source of income matters when you put it in there. So example, if they got a settlement or a judgment is where they receive that money if they put it into an ABLE account.
So you have to be careful if you're getting a settlement. If you don't want the money to count, it should not come to you. If it comes to you and then you put it into the ABLE account, it's income in the month you received it. However, if you have whoever's administering that account deposit the money directly into your ABLE account, then it will not count as income for you. But there are deposit limits for ABLE accounts. This year, the amount is $20,000 from all sources. So small settlements could be deposited into the ABLE account. Larger settlements, you might need to set up a trust.
Okay, and this is kind of similar. If someone else deposits money into another person's ABLE account, will it still count as income?
So if somebody else deposits money into my ABLE account directly, it doesn't count as income for me unless it's my employer. If I do some sort of work for that money, then it's earned income and the ABLE account can't help me with that. I'm not sure if you were asking if it counted as income for you as the person making the deposit, but yes, if I make money and I deposit it into somebody else's account and I'm on SSI, it's still going to count as income in the month that I earned that money.
I kind of read it like it was, if I'm putting into someone else's, would it count as income for them? But you're right, it could be either way. This person says they have 2 life insurance policies, both a term and a whole life, whose face value is over, it says 1,500. Due to these factors, does that mean I most likely won't be eligible for SSI?
So what they will do is they will look at how much you're over $1,500. The amount over $1,500 becomes a countable resource. They're going to combine it with your other countable resources. And if those resources exceed the SSI resource limit, you will not be eligible for SSI. And again, that's $2,000 for an individual and $3,000 for a couple on SSI.
Okay. If someone decides that they don't want SSI, is it a good idea to put property like their house into a trust to protect the family, no matter if they're married or not, if the other person is on SSI? So is it a good idea to put this property in the trust to protect it? Or should nobody have SSI?
So I am not an estate planning attorney. I am not going to give estate planning advice, but that is a great question to talk through with an estate planning attorney. If you're worried about protecting somebody who's on SSI, make sure you look for an estate planning attorney who specializes in SSI and Medicaid planning.
These questions are related back to when you were talking about gross versus net. So I think maybe on that screen, are these gross wages or net wages? And I don't know.
So remember on the SSI calculation sheet at step 2, if you're a wage earner, you put the gross wage amount before any taxes are deducted or anything else is deducted. If you are self-employed, though, they use your net earnings from self-employment. So they take your income from the business, and then they're going to subtract out business expenses. They give you credit for the share of FICA taxes that an employer would normally pay, but that you're paying because you're self-employed, and they use net earnings from self-employment only for people who are self-employed.
How about if you have to use Uber, if you're on SSI or you're paying other people for transportation, gas, maintenance, etc.? Does that count as an ERWI?
So it has to be related to your disability, but if you have a disability where maybe I have a visual impairment, so I'm using Uber to get to and from work, I can't see to drive, that could be an impairment related work expense. If you're paying others, you have to be careful because especially if it's family members, Social Security can push back and say that that's just a family member giving another family member a ride, and that's not really a work expense. And so ride shares, I think, are easier one to demonstrate this is an impairment related work expense.
Why would someone use a pass account if you can just save in an Able account?
Because everything you put in the pass account, you get SSI to make up for that money. It doesn't count when we do the SSI calculation. So basically, Social Security is helping to subsidize your savings plan. You don't get that with an Able account.
Someone wants to know, how is Social Security going to know how much cash or valuables I have on hand?
Well, first of all, you have a legal obligation to report everything to them. They're going to do redeterminations regularly and ask you about those items. But let's say you decided you want to just hide money in your mattress. What will happen? Social Security will never know. They will find out. And I will tell you the number one way they find out is other people call and rat you out. So my sister and I have a fight. She calls Social Security and says, hey, Deborah has $500 in her mattress she's not telling you about. Oh, so they're going to find out. They also, when you get SSI, you give them permission to search for and identify all of your financial accounts and to verify the value on those accounts. So they will find out. And if they find out you were intentionally hiding things, they can prosecute you for fraud and you can go to federal prison. So just don't do that. That's a bad idea.
If we're a couple, should we stick to one SSI calculation sheet for a couple?
Yes, so there is one calculation sheet for couples. You use the couples base rate at step 4. And if you have questions about that, Keith, you know how to contact me. Just let me know.
Okay, that's the judgment question. I think that was in there twice. Do some people have both a third-party special needs trust and an ABLE account? And if so, is there a reason to do this or not do this?
Absolutely. So let's say you got a settlement for $100,000 from a personal injury. That's too much money to put into an ABLE account. You'd want to put that in a special needs trust. But these days, I'm always writing into those trust instruments that they should fund the ABLE account every year. So $100,000 goes into the trust, and then it says to fund the ABLE account each year so that I have more flexibility in how I spend that money. When it's in the trust, my trustee controls how much I get to spend. When it's in my ABLE account, I have ownership over that and I can spend that money myself.
Okay, how about this is a good one. SSI, if you structure your business as an S Corp, can you be considered an employee of the business and file earned income as an employee rather than self-employed business owner?
Yes, but you have to set everything up correctly, and I strongly recommend that you work with an attorney who specializes in setting up corporations and that you double check and make sure you're doing everything properly so that that doesn't count. Honestly, you should look at it both ways too with a work incentive planner. Am I better off being self-employed and looking at my net earnings from self-employment? Or am I better off as a wage employee and using this as wage earned income? Because there could be differences in how it impacts your SSI.
Someone again is asking about, can you have payable and pass? You've already answered that. This is an SSDI question. If they get SSDI and HUD and they're self-employed, can the SSI get reduced if they get a $10,000 grant from Verizon for a small business startup?
Well, they're asking about welfare benefits. I don't know which benefits they're asking about. The answer is going to depend on which benefits. So that's not something that I can really answer. I recommend you talk to a work incentive planner about your benefits and the income that you're talking about receiving, and then get an understanding of how it would impact you.
Okay. Follow up to the grant question. Would we just be excluded from a payment for 1 month if it's greater than the amount? Or would be excluded for as many months equal to the grant? As in, like if they got a $10,000 grant, would it be like 3 months of 3,000, 2 months of 2,000? Well, yeah, I guess how does it allocate across?
Social Security is going to count the income in the month you receive it when you're on SSI. So if you receive that money in April, they're going to count it as income for April. It means you would be ineligible for an SSI payment in 2 months. So you would report that income in May, and you would not be eligible for SSI in June.
We kind of answered this a little bit already. If someone is getting money from VR, vocational rehabilitation, in order to help set them into self-employment as startup grant for supplies, would it count against me for my SSI? Should it be in the business name in order to not count?
Depends on your business entity, and it depends on the source of that funding. Usually funding coming from state vocational rehabilitation agencies is not going to impact your benefits, but sometimes they're passing through money from other sources. So you've got to ask a lot of questions about where that money is coming from, and then you should talk with a work incentive planner or look for yourself and see if it's an excluded source of income.
This is interesting. What happens for individuals who get a lump sum payment back from SSI or SSDI? I guess, like if you apply and it's a year down the road and they go back to point of application, is there a way to ensure it doesn't count against you, or is there a certain spend down period?
There's actually a specific exclusion. So if you receive a back award of Social Security benefits, it doesn't count as income in the month you receive it. And it doesn't count as a resource as long as you spend it within 9 months. So it wouldn't count for April, and then it wouldn't count for the next 9 months as long as I spend it down. After the 9 months, they're going to look and see if there's any of that money left. And if there is, then it would count as a resource at that point.
Okay, for a client in 1619B status and earning near the state threshold, how do income fluctuations impact that continued eligibility? Specifically, if they approach or exceed the threshold and then later become eligible for Medicare. How do those benefits coordinate and what risks are there for losing 1619B? They are also on a state waiver.
All right, so they're going to look at annual income. So month-to-month fluctuations don't matter for 1619B. It's an annual income threshold. So that's what they're going to look at. How much did you earn for the year? If you earn too much for the year, you can ask for an individual threshold. If you're over that, then they're going to terminate your 1619B status at that point. So you would lose your connection to SSI and you would lose that category of Medicaid. You might be eligible for Medicaid buy-in, who knows? But if you become Medicare eligible, it's nice to keep Medicaid because Medicare has a lot of cost-sharing expenses, deductibles, co-insurance, co-payments, and Medicaid could pay those costs for you.
It says the question on immigrant sponsor responsibility was asked earlier, which is why the contact was lost. I wanted to know if the sponsor's income and resources will be calculated even if the immigrant receiving SSI is a U.S. citizen.
Well, if they become a U.S. citizen, they're no longer an immigrant and they no longer have a sponsor.
Right. Okay. Okay. If the person on SSI dies, SSI claims on the house that this person owns, what percentage of SSI will take out of the house?
So you're talking about estate recovery, and this is really a Medicaid question. Medicaid estate recovery only applies in limited circumstances, depending on your state's law. So you'd have to look and see if estate recovery would be something that the person, so if you receive like long-term care Medicaid or you're over a certain age when you get Medicaid, they can take back the amount that they paid for your medical services. But there's all kinds of exceptions. So like they're going to let a surviving spouse stay in the house. If you have adult children with disabilities, they can usually stay. If you have adult children who took care of you and kept you out of a long-term care facility, they're generally going to be able to take the house. So there's a bunch of rules. I would look for an attorney who specializes in Medicaid state recovery to help you answer that question. But SSI is not going to take anything. It's Medicaid.
Someone's asking if there's work being done with organizations that are outside of Social Security to encourage Social Security to do more with letting like parents and others know about programs like Katie Beckett, so that disabled children don't lose their SSI due to parental income.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, if a self-employed person on SSI needs to give themselves a paycheck, what are the ethics behind or rules that could affect that? How does one pay themselves?
Well, again, as you're setting up your business and you're choosing the type of business entity you want to be, you should be working with somebody who can talk to you about those issues. But you would have to follow standard payroll practices, and there's all kinds of rules around that, not ethical rules, but actually laws about how to do that, FICA withholding, and all of that. And so you'd have to follow those rules. So there's a lot of education you would need to do around those kind of human resources and payroll issues to be able to do that. Some companies actually contract with payroll service providers, which can be expensive if you're a small business, but they know all the rules. And so they can actually issue those payments. But I would talk to the person who's helping you choose your business entity around what payroll might look like for that type of corporation or business.
If you are running a business and the income or the amount in the business bank account exceeds $2,000, does that count against your asset limits, or can you put business income into an ABLE account?
Again, it depends on your business entity. So if you're a corporation, you have a separate entity that owns a bank account. But if you're like a partnership or you just are self-employed and you're the only owner, you're not incorporated, that's your money. And so again, as you're setting up and thinking about what type of entity you want to have, talk with the person who's helping you to set that up, to talk about how to set up bank accounts, realizing whether, if you're like in a partnership, with somebody to set up the business, half the income in that account could count towards you if you don't set it up as like a limited liability company. So choosing your business entity is really an important piece of this puzzle, and you need to understand how that business entity is going to operate and how that might impact your benefits.
Okay. What measures would you suggest when someone's struggling trying to get on SSI? They have all the paperwork, but they're getting kind of shuffled around between offices and things.
Find an advocate. So some legal aid or legal services programs will help with that. Some state disability rights offices will help with that, or they'll know advocates in the community who can help. Sometimes having a professional advocate help you can make all the difference. And some of them will do it at no charge or at a reduced fee, depending on your income.
Do you have any advice of what you might say to a family of someone on SSI who is convinced that their child is unable to work, even after they're looking at the SSI calculation and seeing that they'd be better off, as you've said, and you explained 1619B, they're obviously still concerned about loss.
And a lot of families are. I mean, they count on that child's SSI payment to pay the living expenses, right? And so it's really an education process. If the child's a minor, the parent has the right to make that decision. If the child's emancipated or over age 18, then they get to make the decisions themselves. And so for me, it's always just been a process of education, making sure that people are making decisions from facts and not from fear. So making sure they have all of the information.
If you can't find a work incentive planner in your area, do you have a website? Are you taking new clients? Two questions.
So unfortunately, Cornell University will not allow me to do direct service work incentive planning. I had to get special permission to do my son's work incentive planning. So that is not something we can do, but we can give you information in the chat box about how to find a work incentive planner in your area. There are many of them across the country.
And some of them, you don't have to be in that state to work with them either. They do work virtually across states. Someone's asking if there's going to be a webinar specific to self-employment. We did already have that webinar. Again, it will be on our website in past events. We also have a 5-part series that Debora and counterparts are doing coming up in June, but that is for folks that already sort of have a good knowledge of the basics of SSI and SSDI, because it's not going to go over all of those details. It's really focused only on self-employment. So if you are a benefit planner or you are someone who already has a great knowledge of that, it would be a wonderful series, and we'll have stuff coming out on that soon. And it's not until June, but just general self-employment, for folks that are receiving SSI and SSDI, and maybe one of my colleagues can put the link to that specific archived webinar in the chat for us. Okay, if a family member is an Uber driver and I pay them to take me to work daily, can I use that payment as an IRWI?
If you're requesting the ride through Uber and you're paying Uber and that's how they're getting paid for the ride, if you're just giving them cash in the car, that's probably not going to work. But if you're using them in their capacity as an Uber employee, well, an Uber driver, then that's going to count as an IRWI.
It says, how can you compare? Is there a simulator somewhere? I'm guessing, how can you compare benefits and things like that? I mean, DB 101 is great if their state has it, but how would you answer that?
So we've actually created a disability benefits at work toolkit that has a lot of the information that I've gone over, plus information for SSDI and Medicare. And so it goes into a lot more detail. You could always check out websites like that. Social Security publishes a publication called The Red Book that also has a lot of information about these return to work rules. You could use that online SSI calculator to look at some different scenarios. You know, what if I worked and earned $1,000 per month? What if I earned $1,500 per month? You could do some side-by-side comparisons that way.
Again, you may be referring someone to a business entity attorney, but is there issues related to creating an S-Corp income as business expense?
Yes, so talk to the person that's setting up your entity because yes, and then make sure when you talk to a work incentive planner, you look for ones who've had specialized training and experience with self-employment, like the people who are going to go through the course we're doing in June.
That's a good question. What if someone lends me $500 and I have to pay it back?
As long as you have a properly executed loan document saying that you have to pay this money back, it shouldn't count as income, but make sure that that paperwork is done correctly before you take the money. So I've seen people get $500 and Social Security finds out a year later and they try to claim that it was a loan and get a document signed then. Nope, it has to have been signed. You have to do a promissory note at the time the loan is made. And if both parties sign it and agree to the repayment terms, that should not count as income.
Someone's asking, what about an LLC? I guess in context again about, what business setup you have.
So if you actually have an LLC, it's going to depend again on exactly how it's set up and what the rules are. Usually that's going to operate with its own separate bank accounts and its own separate stuff that's not going to be yours. But again, you're going to have to work with the person who's helping you set up that business entity and a work incentive planner to make sure that you understand what your documents say, what your business is looking like, and how that income is going to impact your benefits.
This is a question that I actually answered earlier about Verizon, and so they're asking if the platform information is going to be posted. I'm pretty sure it's in there somewhere, but maybe Ruth or somebody can pop in how they get to our webinar. Our Verizon link into the chat, even if it's there earlier. There's so much in the chat. It would be good to put it in again. Okay. So for SSI, if they play a musical instrument on the street and get $50 from somebody passing by, is this considered income that needs to be reported?
Yes, all income must be reported for SSI. And I would argue that that's earned income because you are performing, you are working in order to earn that money. And remember, SSI only counts less than half of earned income, so it will have less of an impact on your SSI. So I would report that earned income.
That is it for the Q&A questions. I know several times people have put things in the chat, but then we've asked them to put them in Q&A, so hopefully they did. There are so much in the chat, so I ask if you did have a question, you only put it in chat. Can you pop it into the Q&A and we'll have a look. I am kind of scrolling through. Okay, somebody just said, you're mentioning all these different kinds of attorneys to discuss details and get answers. But in general, having more than about 2,000 can reduce your SSI to 0. How can we find all those specialists on such income?
Great question. And I would say contact your local bar association. If there are any law schools in your area, reach out to them. Sometimes they're going to operate clinics where they provide free or reduced cost advice to people who are starting their own business. You're also going to find a lot of resources on the NDI small business website. So that's another great resource to help you answer some of these questions. And so I know I used to teach at law school clinics and we ran free clinics on how to do different things. Mine specialized on disability benefits, imagine that. But there are oftentimes resources available that you wouldn't know about if you don't ask the legal community about those resources.
Someone said, does the Small Business Administration still exist as a resource? Yes, it does, through the Small Business Development Centers, Women's Business Centers, and such. We can put the national link so you can find someone in your local area on that. Can you put the most important attorney we need in the chat? I think you've mentioned a lot of different ones, so I'm not sure.
It depends on what your problem.
It depends on what you need. Yeah, right.
So, figure out what your legal problem is, then you know what attorney to look for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, all right. So right now we are finished with questions in the Q&A. Again, if you did put something in Q&A, I mean, in chat that you want to pop into Q&A, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, I think we will move on to anything else you wanted to mention, Deborah, or over to the rest of my team. Oh, I meant attorneys for small business. You can disabilitysmallbusiness.org, and I'm sure they'll put that in the chat, is our small business hub. Certainly put in something through there that you'd like some help, and we can see what we can do. We can't pay for an attorney for you, but we might have some resources. What if someone gets a one-time settlement? I think we've really already answered that.
Report it, report it, report it.
Is there a way to qualify for SSDI based solely on disability if you don't have enough work credits? No, it would be SSI.
Well, again, if you can draw off of a parent.
Oh, a parent, right.
Work credits, you could do that if you meet the criteria for childhood disability benefits. Well, I just want to thank you, Nikki, and the entire team at NDI for having me today. This has been so much fun. I want to thank Leora for being our captioner and thank our interpreters. I appreciate all of you being here today.